Start streaming. Start recording. I think she's fine. Her mic.
Souls Unitarian Universalist Church, building community, inspiring growth, creating change. Here in the heart of Kansas City, we come together to create this hour of shared reflection so that we might be renewed in courage for these times and inspired to lives of greater dignity, higher purpose, deeper generosity, and more effective action. If you are new to Unitarian Universalism or to our congregation, we want to get to know you and share part of your journey. If this place is already your spiritual home, welcome once more. We need one another, and it is good to be together again. Because we care for one another's safety, our congregation is gathering online during this long season of coronavirus pandemic. Nevertheless, through the gifts of technology, we continue to celebrate community and connections as we lean into the values of justice, compassion, and reason. Together, we learn the love that has the power to overcome both loneliness in the heart and oppression in the world. Welcome to our service this morning. May the words and music and images that we offer today nourish our best selves, calling forth abundant wisdom and love. Arise, O souls, Good morning, and welcome to this gathering of the All Souls Church community. We begin this morning with the words of the British poet Shelley. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. It is not wrong to take satisfaction in the downfall of those who, in the excess of their greed and pride, do harm to others. It is appropriate to rejoice in the unfolding of poetic justice. It is never wrong to be reminded that we are all, even the most powerful among us, mortal creatures. Such feelings are part of the evolution of human morality. So too is compassion. So too is pity. So is the wish that no being should suffer. To be human is to live in the tension between the demands of justice and the pleas of mercy. This month, our Universalist heritage celebrates the 250th year of its arrival on this continent in the hope-filled ministry of John Murray. His teaching that salvation, whatever that means, comes to us all without exception, echoes today in our principle of affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person. One of the functions of such teaching and such principles is to hold those great truths even in moments when our personal feelings may not yet align with them. That's okay. It's better to be honest than sanctimonious. Yet, if our hands and our hearts are busy with the work of tikkun olam, repairing and healing the brokenness of the world, then we shall have little enough leisure for spitefulness. The sooner we turn from the misfortunes of the mighty to the struggles of the humble, the more useful and hopeful our own lives will be. In this hour of gathering, let us lift our hearts to that which unites and sustains us. Let us kindle once again the chalice flame of truth, commitment, and community. Wherever you are, bring your light. It is needed in these days. Whoever you are, remember that you are a thread, indispensable to the web of connection that holds the hope of our collective future. Wherever the path of your journey, pause now. Remember beauty and good intention and gratitude. Be renewed in spirit and glad of heart. Please join me now in speaking once again the words of our covenant promise to one another in community. Together, we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Our opening song is Soon the Day Will Arrive, and that will be followed by listening to a poignant conversation among parents of children of color. If you have a joy or concern to be shared later in the service, we invite you to enter it into the chat by the end of the offering. Please join me now in singing together.
tomorrow, and our vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with new hope, not in sorrow, and a promise to make a new start. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me.
My father's conversation with me was daily.
My grandfather talked to me as a black man from Augusta, Georgia, growing up in the Deep South.
It's probably Rob, my older brother, had this conversation. But then it's more of like, wear a condom, do this. It's like little man lessons.
When a cop pulls you over.
When you get pulled over, not if you get pulled over.
At some point, you will get pulled over, and here is how you act.
As a young black man growing up in New York, I've had, a few run-ins with the police and being completely innocent.
The people pull us out of the car, throw us on the floor. It's in February, so it's like snow and slush and stuff on the ground. Put their knees in our back, put the guns to our head.
As I'm putting my hands on the steering wheel so I don't make the police nervous, I realized how nervous I was. And then I realized my children were nervous.
The thing that people say is you have to talk to him before he experiences racism himself. But when is that?
He is going to turn into a large, scary black man. And that's not who he is, but that's how he will be perceived. I know what this kid's going to look. He's going to look like him. I know what he's going to look like.
I'm a large, scary black man.
You are a large, scary black man, okay?
That's a problem in and of itself.
And that's a problem.
I am not large nor scary.
But I can't do anything with that.
I'm short. Anyway, go ahead.
It's frightening, and I'm being very light when I use the word frightening.
If something goes wrong, your first line of defense, the parents not being there, is to go to the police.
If you're Caucasian.
So, but I mean,
yes,
still,
that's what you teach your children. Unfortunately, it can't work for black children, right?
It doesn't mean that every police officer is inherently a bad person. But what it does mean is that the police force, that institution, does not look out for your best interests.
There's this unspoken code of racism and white supremacy that says that my life does not matter.
You could put your hands up and say and cooperate and say that I'm choking and still be killed, and then there's no repercussions.
It's maddening. I get so frustrated and angry about having to prepare my kids for something that they're not responsible for.
And these are conversations that people of other races do not have to have with their children.
The conversation with him was really just, look, you're a beautiful young boy.
Being an African American is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful blessing. You have come from great people, but it's also a hard thing.
In America, because of your skin color, as a black boy and as a black man, we are going to be dealing with a lot of danger.
Under no circumstance are you to talk to the police if you're arrested until I get there.
Do what they say. Don't get into any arguments.
Make sure your hands are out of your pockets so they can see.
These are the questions you can ask. This is who to call. This is what happens if this bad thing. It's not like, please, master, don't whip me. No, it's like, excuse me, sir, what is your badge number? I'm going to film this.
If you want police brutality to stop, if you want police to treat you like a human being, then you have to see yourself as a human being.
You have every right in this world that anyone else does.
What I love about you as my son is I remember when we thought about having you and, knowing that we wanted you. and watching you grow.
You are the Muhammad Ali, you are the Malcolm X, you are the Martin Luther King.
You are an amazing young man, and the future is yours.
And I will do my best to make sure you're safe. That's it. I love you.
Good morning. My name is Cheryl Westra, and I serve on your Board of Trustees. When we moved to Kansas City, we sought out a community that would support our social justice values and that would provide our children with the religious literacy needed in society. We were fortunate to find that and so much more in All Souls. Whether it was the wonderful music, the friendships formed in RE, the sermons that challenged our minds, the social justice activities, the communal breaking of bread over fabulous food, the classes that enriched us, or the numerous social events over the years, All Souls has offered us a place to come together to nourish our spirits. While our current situation doesn't allow us to gather as we were accustomed, the staff and volunteers have worked hard to ensure that we continue to stay connected. I'm grateful to them and to all of you who are part of this community. And I ask that you give as you are able to help support this church. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Thank you. Let's say together the words of dedication for our offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
In an interview with Throughline on NPR on June 4th, 2020, Khalil Gibran Muhammad, a professor of history at the Harvard Kennedy School, summed up the preceding conversation with these words. This history of policing gives me clarity not to have the same aspirational faith that simply pointing out the problem today is sufficient to fixing it, because the problem has been known for a century. The evidence has been presented for a century. The recommendations for change, for holding police officers accountable, for charging them with criminal offenses when they behave criminally, for establishing citizen review boards that have an independent investigative power, all of it, just like the dozens of consent decrees and pattern and practice of Department of Justice investigations like the one done in Ferguson in 2015, or the one done in Chicago in the wake of the Laquan McDonald shooting in 2017. It's a century of the same story playing out over and over again. So when you ask me the question, what do I think about this moment? What's possible in this moment? It seems to me that what's possible is recognizing that police officers and police agencies are incapable of fixing themselves. They've never been able to do it, and they've never particularly been compelled to do it. The incentives have never quite added up to be strong enough.
Professor Muhammad continues, and so the question that has to be asked in the wake of George Floyd, and I think this question is being asked and answered by more white people than I've seen in my lifetime, is, do white people in America still want the police to protect their interests over the rights and dignity and lives of Black and, in too many instances, brown, indigenous, and Asian populations in this country. When I think about Amy Cooper, the Central Park dog walker who called police because a Black man who was bird watching asked her to leash her dog, referring to the police as her protection, her personal protection agency, she doesn't have to be conscious to know that she's telling us something that we need to hear beyond the outrage of calling the police on an African American bird watcher and weaponizing the potential of what might as well have been a 19th century cry, a fake, false cry for rape, which led to too many Black men being lynched and entire communities being burned down to the ground in acts of absolute domestic terrorism. She's telling us something about the political marketplace in this country that has rewarded white fear and protection of white spaces, even when it itself is criminal.
Professor Muhammad concludes, "This isn't just about the president and white supremacists. The line connects from the history we've talked about here today to the biggest crime bill passed in U.S. history in the 1990s under a Democratic president, to a progressive, self-identified liberal New Yorker walking her Cocker Spaniel in Central Park. Those lessons have to be taken fully into account, and white people are going to have to define a different political marketplace that rewards a different kind of country. Do they want the police doing the same thing that slave patrols did in the colonial period, in the antebellum period, in the postbellum period? These are the sheriff's auctions and clans and bull connors. Or in the Great Migration period, as has been attested to going back to Chicago all the way up to the present. Because if they want a different outcome, they're going to have to demand a different outcome, and one that looks a lot more like the kind of policing they want for themselves as opposed to the one they've been putting on other people."
Quies custodiet ipsos custodes. But who shall guard these guardians? It is a question as old as Western philosophy, as contemporary as today's headlines or tomorrow's election. Or if you prefer your classics from the British mode, there is Lord Acton's 19th century observation that all power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's not that we don't understand the problem. It's that neither our social engineers nor our ethical theorists have come up with a solution over the centuries. Plato had one answer: put all your resources into the moral education of those designated to rule and keep everyone else well away from the levers of power. Jesus had another: Let only those without sin themselves first cast a stone at wrongdoers. Machiavelli, along with many others, had a third answer. Let power do what power does, and just worry about whether you yourself are on the comfortable side of it. Those patrician colonial instigators in the closing decades of the 18th century, playing at designing a new nation, had yet another thought. Separate the powers and make each accountable to different authorities so that they might balance each other out. As history goes, it has been an interesting experiment so far. The devil is, as they say, in the details. In this case, the detail was slavery. They knew it was wrong, those founding fathers. Several of them acknowledged it, but they all knew. And they hoped they could sweep that annoying detail under the constitutional rug long enough to get their envisioned government up and running. Kick that troublesome can of worms down the road for another generation to deal with. Which is what they did. And we all know how that turned out, and we are all living with the reverberations of that chickening out to this day. We all know how they made up the famous rule that an enslaved black person would be equal to 3/5 of a white person when you were counting how much population a state had. Another detail that they slipped into the constitution of their new government was the recognition that individual states would need something other than a continental army in order to keep the insurrections of enslaved peoples, as well as the indigenous resistance of Native American tribal people, under control. From these anxieties among the colonialist landed gentry arose what the Second Amendment calls a well-regulated militia, part of the forerunner of today's police forces. It was, as Ibram Kendi demonstrates, stamped from the beginning. Racism is baked into American law enforcement from its earliest days. Policing in this country has had all kinds of functions over the centuries, but one of them has always been the protection of white people and communities through the control of communities and individuals of color. And it has never been about the protection of communities of color through the control of white people. The more I read and learn, the more difficult I suppose it is for anyone who lives in this culture with white skin to comprehend how historically rooted and justified is the deep distrust of the police in Black experience. This is brought home to me all the more starkly in the awareness that every direct encounter that I have ever had with a Kansas City police officer, either in my life as a private citizen or as a member of the clergy, has been courteous, professional, earnest, and helpful. As a well-off, white, older woman, I receive deference. I am clearly on the serve and protect side of the equation. And yet I know the names and stories of Ryan Stokes, Terrence Bridges Jr., Cameron Lamb, and Donnie Sanders, all unarmed Black men killed by members of the KCPD. And I have heard first-person accounts from peaceful protesters and journalists at the plaza last May and June, who were tear-gassed, assaulted, and threatened by police units in riot gear, and I have seen videotapes of these same brutal actions. If I were Black, I would have no confidence that any law enforcement professional actually had my best interests at heart at any given moment. I would be having that heartbreaking and soul-wrenching conversation with my child, begging them to let their dignity go so that they would come out of a confrontation with the police alive. just alive. Everything else, every other humiliation can be endured, but not losing your child because they tried to fight back or mouth off. As I ponder these things, I have come to reject the bad apple theory of police brutality and misconduct. The officers who hid behind their riot gear and gassed my colleagues and parishioners are not different from the ones who were so helpful in the first days of our congregation's emergency warming center. I think it's not the specific people who are the problem. Many of them deeply want to do the right thing, to genuinely serve and protect, and in the appropriate circumstances they would. They do, in fact, serve and protect what the institution of policing was created to serve and protect, which is the safety of white bodies and property from the resistance of people and communities of color against systemic harm. It is unfair, in a way that those involved deeply and properly feel but cannot usually articulate, to punish individual officers who get caught in a moment of doing something that the system fundamentally exists to accomplish. If this is indeed the case, it becomes understandable why advocates who have been trying for decades and centuries to protest the injustice at the heart of policing as an enterprise are substantially unimpressed by various plans for the reform of that enterprise. It is perhaps instructive to consider the analogies from 200 years ago, when people who were morally appalled by the violent practices of slavery ran around trying to reform the behavior of slave owners. Owners ought not to be brutalizing their slaves, overworking them, raping them, separating their families, providing only squalor for their living situations. It was these mean-spirited, irresponsible masters and mistresses who were giving the institution of slavery a bad name, the reformers argued. It was unchristian. If only things could be a little more considerate, a little less oppressive, then enslaved people would have less to complain about and less tendency to rise up and rebel, which would be better for the owners after all. The whole system could work so much better and be more acceptable if those in power would just control their worst impulses. There were initiatives to try to create legal consequences, usually in the form of fines payable to the state, against owners who abused their slaves. The slaves themselves, as you might imagine, were not deeply impressed by these efforts. When the activists of today speak of abolishing the police, their choice of language is not an unfortunate accident. Rather, it is a hearkening back to the truth of what was at stake for enslaved people in the abolition arguments of the early 1800s. Certainly, grievous harm was done by the arbitrary and deliberate cruelty that some masters practiced. But the goal of those at risk was never to create a benign class of lenient, more appreciative owners, nor to try to mitigate the behavior of the worst through legal constraint. The problem was the system and the premises upon which it was founded, not the ways in which it was badly manifested by individuals. Do you see how the efforts of slavery reform, well-intentioned as their advocates may have been, continued to center the motivations and actions of white people, leaving the privilege and power unchanged in their hands? And how, in this scenario, Black bodies and Black lives remained objects within the institution of slavery, stripped of agency, and dependent on the changeable will of a dominant white culture and legal structure. In a June 10th op-ed column, Erwin Chemerinsky, Dean and Professor of Law at the UC Berkeley School of Law, describes preparing an investigative study of the Los Angeles Police Department's Rampart scandal, which was published in September of 2000. Professor Chemerinsky writes, "I believe most police officers are hardworking, honest, and responsible individuals who are doing their best, often under the most difficult circumstances. Indeed, my respect for the police was greatly enhanced by my contact with them in preparing this report. I came to realize that Los Angeles was in a repetitive cycle. First, there would be a major incident of police abuse. Then investigative commissions would be created and issue reports. Some of their recommendations would be adopted, some not. The city would declare victory over the problem until the next incident, when the cycle would repeat itself. I think this is true of our entire country with regard to problems in policing. I saw that inevitably incidents were dismissed as the result of a few bad cops. This was the reaction to the officers who beat Rodney King. This was the reaction to the officers in the Rampart scandal. Most recently, this was the reaction to the officers who killed George Floyd. This minimizes the problem and fails to recognize its systemic nature." The professor continues, "I learned that a crucial problem in the LAPD was a deeply embedded code of silence that kept officers from reporting misconduct of other officers. Many police officers told me they were afraid that if they reported misconduct, they would be transferred to less desirable positions and locations, or even worse, other officers would not protect their backs when they were in trouble. I saw, too, that relying on prosecutors to expose police misconduct is inherently problematic. Prosecutors rely on police officers for testimony and evidence every day in their cases." Many of Professor Chemerinsky's observations can also be found in the 1968 report of the President's National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, also known as the Kerner Commission. Several such reports were issued detailing instances of police corruption in Miami and New York during the 1980s surge in crack cocaine and the resulting war on drugs. These cycles of scandal and attempted reform go back to the private security forces like Pinkerton's agents and vigilante groups like the KKK that were prevalent in the late 19th century following the Civil War. Like America's prison system, America's policing system has never actually worked as its theory claims, and it has always been plagued with eruptions of corruption, conspiracy, and abuse. It is no doubt true, as Chemerinsky recounts, that efforts at reform are made more difficult by codes of silence and mutual protection among officers, by the reluctance of local prosecutors to pursue the very officers on whose work their own success depends, as well as by police unions, which often collectively bargain for provisions which make firing or disciplining officers for misconduct all but impossible. These barriers can frustrate even the most reform-minded of administrators. The average tenure for a police chief in a major city department is 2.5 years. Family systems theory teaches that when a number of persistent good faith efforts to solve a problem have achieved nothing, it is likely that the problem isn't really the problem. The interwoven history of white supremacy and policing in this country suggests to me that it is fruitless to seek change through greater accountability in an organization that is already doing what it is historically and systemically intended to do? What then would it mean to abolish the police in this current cycle of crisis? I invite you to indulge for a moment in a thought experiment. What might it look like if policing was designed to protect communities of color from white control, even by violence if necessary? Because that, after all, is the fundamental premise of all armed intervention, that violence should be used only by those who are designated by the state to protect the interests of the state. And throughout our history as a nation, the interests of the state have always been identified with colonial European power and property. What if the interest of the state was to protect vulnerable people from harm? You may think that's already in there somewhere, like the ragu sauce, but it isn't. It's a radical idea. In the literal meaning of the word, it goes to the root of the thing. One change that it might mean is a rather drastic reallocation of local government resources towards services that can only be provided awkwardly and badly by police. In many cities, the police spend a lot of time on traffic and motor vehicle issues, on false burglar alarms, on noise complaints, and on problems with animals, the law professor Barry Friedman writes in the University of Pennsylvania Law Review. What if Americans retrained ourselves to expect armed officers to come only if they think there's really a risk of someone getting hurt? The dispatcher would route calls that aren't about crimes or a risk of harm to social workers, mediators, and others. When a police report leads to criminal charges, only a subset of the whole, about 80% of them are for misdemeanors. Friedman argues that we should hand off some part of what the police do to people who are better trained for it. There has been such a massive disinvestment in the social safety net that should exist to give Black communities an opportunity to thrive, says Alicia Garza, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. Now we're having a conversation that's not just about how Black communities are policed and what reforms are required, but also about why we've invested exclusively in a criminalization model for public safety instead of investing in housing, jobs, healthcare, education for Black communities, and fighting structural inequality. Budgets are moral documents reflecting priorities and values. Like me, many members of communities of color think that any society needs its guardians. Black, Indigenous, and other people of color do not want to live in unsafe, lawless communities. The trouble is, too many of them already do. If they cannot trust the police as currently organized, then they have no legally sanctioned way to respond to behavior that they regard as truly harmful within their communities. If calling the police is only likely to make a bad situation even more dangerous for bystanders as well as those who might do harm, then it is less likely that anyone will call them or really assist them if they come. When New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was asked, "What does an America with defunded police look like to you?" she responded in a way that got my attention. "The good news is that it actually doesn't take a ton of imagination," she said. "It looks like a suburb." Affluent white communities already live in a world where they choose to fund youth, health, housing, and so on, more than they fund the police. These communities have lower crime rates not because they have more police, but because they have more resources to support healthy society in a way that reduces crime. When a teenager or a preteen does something harmful in a suburb, and I say teen because this is often where lifelong carceral cycles begin for Black and brown communities, white communities bend over backwards to find alternatives to incarceration for their loved ones to protect their future, like community service, or rehab, or restorative measures. Why don't we treat Black and brown people the same way? Why doesn't the criminal system care about Black teens' futures the way they care for white teens' futures? Why doesn't the news use Black people's graduation or family photos in stories the way they do when they cover white people, for instance, Brock Turner, who commit hateful crimes? Affluent white suburbs design their own lives so that they walk through the world without having much interruption or interaction with police at all, aside from community events and speeding tickets, and many of these communities try to reduce those too. Just starting there would be a dramatically and radically different world than what we are experiencing now. To abolish policing as we know it in the present is a way to talk about something different from the unending cycles of corruption, abuse, and attempted reform that our society has endured for more than a century. These struggles will never bear any useful fruit as long as control in the service of privilege and property continues to be the unwritten systemic agenda. To defund the police is to reconceive how we invest in the safety and protection of our neighbors. It is a call to think again about what it is that we are truly trying to accomplish and what we are asking of those who offer to serve and protect on our behalf. We owe them, as well as our marginalized, vulnerable, and at-risk fellow citizens, the effort of creative imagination and care that would go into building a new way for our guardians to work. It's in our own mission, after all, to create change toward a just and compassionate society, a dramatically and radically different world than what we are experiencing now. In that aspiration, let us join together in song.
We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are building a new way. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, that is the seed. We are building a new way. Peace and freedom.
In the depth of our confusion and despair, let us seek a place of stillness. In the heat of our outrage, let us reach out to wisdom. Trapped in the spiral of disgust and fear, let us remember compassion. Not because others have earned grace from us, but because we know that unless we are released from the burdens of our own pettiness and folly, all is indeed lost. Let us turn again to the duties of right relationship and the songs of hope, even afar off. Let us live into the covenant of kindness as people on a journey together, pilgrims toward a land of joyful justice, mutuality, and enduring peace. We are called upon to share that journey as we lift up the joys and concerns that are shaping our lives in these days. We are missing our friends whose lives have ended recently: Shar Reynolds, Davy Davis, and Carolyn Connor. Other joys and concerns include Melanie, who has a joy and concern. She says, I'm recovering well from a hysterectomy in September. However, the pathology report found cancer. I'm now seeking opinions and second opinions on my treatment options. My joy is that I found a new doctor in May that really finally listened and probably ended up saving my life. She's aiding me in the next steps and expediting the process. Walt has a joy that after more than 1.5 years in hospitals and rehab, Karen Wells is now home and continuing her rehab there. No visitors at this time, but she's accessible by phone, text, email, and Facebook. Scott has a concern. He says, my dad was diagnosed with COVID on September 26th. He's doing well in the hospital, should be released to home early this week, but then will need home health care and assistance to be safe at home. Scott has a joy, too, that my sister Laura in Omaha has been able to be there to support our dad during his illness. Ruth has a joy and concern that her grandson spent a couple of days at Children's Mercy with breathing problems, but it's not COVID, thankfully. Possibly it's asthma. Peter has a joy, which is that Barbara and he celebrated the birth of a new grandchild late last month, as well as the birth of a new grandnephew even later last month. Jean has a joy of seeing friends during the garden tour that she hadn't seen in months. Peter has a concern that his sister-in-law, who's in her 60s, lives alone in New Jersey, and his hope is that she finds whatever she needs right now to help improve her quality of life. And Beth shares her joy of working with the dedicated Mark Gibbons and other members of the Hunger Outreach team. We also hold gently all those outreachings of the Spirit that abide unspoken in our hearts. Will you join me in speaking the words of response on your screen, followed by our closing song? These words are from the diary of Anne Frank. I can feel the suffering of millions, and yet if I look up into the skies, I think that it will all come right, that this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. In the meantime, we must uphold our ideals, for perhaps the time will come when we shall be able to carry them out. Now I extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our minds and hearts until the time shall come when we will be together again. Let's join in our closing song.
Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom.
Thank you for being with us this morning. We invite you now to spend a few minutes of informal chat on our Zoom page, which you can find from the homepage on our All Souls website. I also remind members of the congregation that the second part of our online annual meeting with award presentations and a revised budget will begin at 1 o'clock. You can join through either Zoom or Facebook from links on our website's homepage. And please plan to join us here next week when we will celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day with the help of some members of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and other UU friends from around the country. This is a spiritual heritage that can nurture all of us. Meanwhile, please, everyone, take care and stay well this week.